The house was too quiet for its size. Marble floors swallowed footsteps, and tall windows let in light that felt more like interrogation than warmth. Somewhere upstairs, the girl sat in her world of silence, and the man who owned this house, the man with a net worth printed in business magazines, paced behind locked doors, taking calls worth millions. But in the kitchen, where the scent of lemon oil still lingered on polished counters, Ruth hummed softly as she wiped the last glass clean. Her voice was low, fragile almost, but it carried a rhythm that belonged not to this house, but to places far older. Church pews back home, evenings on her grandmother's porch, Sunday mornings when the only thing steady was faith. Ruth had been here for 3 years. She knew the girl, Isabella, better than anyone besides her mother, though even that was uncertain, for Isabella had never spoken. Not a single word in 9 long years. Doctors called it autism, a world too vast and unknowable for her father to enter. Tutors came and went, therapists with briefcases full of flashcards, but the silence remained, solid as stone. Yet Ruth noticed things, the way Isabella's eyes lingered on colors, the way she tilted her head when Ruth sang spirituals under her breath, the faint twitch of a smile when Ruth dusted the shelves and whispered, "Child, you are loved, even if the world don't know how to say it." Still, silence ruled the mansion, until that day. It began with humiliation. The CEO had guests, executives in tailored suits, men who spoke about profits as if people were disposable paper. Ruth was told to stay out of sight. She knew the rule: move quietly, unseen. But Isabella had wandered downstairs, her bare feet on the marble echoing like questions no one wanted asked. The executives stared. Some exchanged looks, others whispered. And when Isabella pressed her hands to her ears, rocking slightly from the noise of their laughter, one man smirked. "Such a shame," he said under his breath, though loud enough for Ruth to hear. "All that money, and not even your own daughter can say your name." The room froze. The CEO's jaw tightened. He waved for his assistant, tried to laugh it off, but his eyes flickered with shame. Not for the cruelty of the comment, but for being reminded that his empire couldn't buy what he wanted most. Ruth stood in the doorway, rag in hand, blood burning hot in her chest. She wanted to say something, to defend the child who hid behind her own silence. But what was a housekeeper? A black woman in a mansion not her own, against men who signed checks with a flick of their wrists? She lowered her eyes. Not here, not now, she told herself. Don't give them reason. And then it happened. Isabella, small and trembling, crossed the room, past her father's expensive shoes, past the men's smirks. She walked straight to Ruth and clutched the fabric of her apron. And in a voice so fragile it could have broken in the air, she said, "Ruth." The rag slipped from Ruth's hand. The room collapsed into silence. Executives blinked, confused. The CEO's phone slid from his grip and hit the floor. But Ruth, her heart thundered. She knelt down, hands shaking, eyes wide as tears blurred her vision. "Baby, what did you say?" Her voice cracked like an old record. Isabella looked at her, those wide, searching eyes full of something fierce and undeniable. She repeated it, clearer this time. Ruth, for the first time in 9 years, a word, and not to her father, not to the world that demanded her speak. To Ruth, the woman invisible to everyone but her. The CEO staggered, his face flushed with something between pride and humiliation. This miracle hadn't happened in therapy rooms or hospitals. It hadn't come from his power or money. It came from the woman scrubbing his floors, the woman whose skin those executives dismissed as background. The silence that followed was thick with truth. Ruth's hands trembled as she touched Isabella's cheek, whispering, "I hear you, baby. I've been hearing you all along." But inside, a storm rose. Why me? Why not her daddy? Why not her mama? Why the one they barely see as worthy of sitting at their table? Because children know. They feel where love is steady, where patience is not bought, but lived. Isabella had chosen the one person who never asked her to be more than she was. Still, Ruth felt the weight of eyes on her, The executives whispering, the CEO fighting to regain control of the narrative. He forced a laugh, too loud, too rehearsed. "Well," he said, voice strained, "looks like she finally found her voice. About time." But Ruth saw it in his eyes, the resentment, not at his daughter, but at her, at Ruth, for being the vessel of a miracle that his money couldn't buy. That night, after the guests had gone and the mansion grew quiet again, Ruth sat alone at the kitchen table. Her hands were clasped so tight the knuckles ached. She thought of her grandmother's words. "Sometimes the Lord puts his light through the cracks the world wants to seal." But was this light, or was it a curse? Because now, Ruth wasn't just the housekeeper. She was the woman whose name broke a 9-year silence. And in houses built on power and pride, miracles come with a price. She stared at the clock ticking on the wall, the minutes dragging heavy. Upstairs, Isabella slept, clutching the worn doll Ruth had mended countless times. Ruth's chest swelled with something between fear and pride. And in the stillness, her own thoughts whispered back, "What happens now? Will they let me stay? Or will they make sure this story is told without me in it?" The next morning, the house felt different. The silence was no longer empty. It was charged, humming with a memory that couldn't be undone. Ruth went about her chores as if nothing had happened, but every sound, every footstep seemed to press in on her. She could feel eyes watching. The CEO's wife lingered longer in doorways, her smile polite, stretched too thin. The CEO himself avoided her gaze, his voice clipped, rehearsed, as though rehearsing control. But Isabella was different. She followed Ruth like a shadow, her steps soft, her presence constant. And though she didn't speak again that day, her eyes said everything. They carried a bond now, a fragile thread spun in front of men who would rather cut it than admit it was real. By evening, Ruth was called into the study. The CEO sat behind his desk, the smell of whiskey curling in the air. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he studied the glass in his hand, as if the amber liquid held answers to questions too heavy to speak aloud. Finally, he said, "What happened yesterday? It can't leave this house." Ruth's heart sank. Can't leave this house? A miracle. Silenced like a scandal. "Sir?" she asked quietly. He leaned forward, voice low, controlled. "My daughter spoke her first word, yes, but people will twist it. They'll say I failed as a father, that she gave something to the help, that she couldn't give to me. The press would devour it. Investors would laugh. You understand what's at stake." Ruth stared at him, her chest tight. "So it isn't her voice you're protecting. It's your own reputation, sir," she said softly. "Your little girl finally found a way out of her silence. That ain't something to bury in shame. That's a gift." But his jaw hardened. "And I will decide how it's remembered. Do your job, Ruth. Keep cleaning, keep quiet." The words hit harder than she expected, but not unfamiliar. She had lived her whole life in rooms where her dignity was a whisper others pretended not to hear. Still, that night, when Isabella crept into the kitchen and curled into Ruth's lap, Ruth held her close and hummed. The child pressed her ear against Ruth's chest, listening to the heartbeat that had steadied her through years of silence. And Ruth thought, no matter what they try to erase, this child knows where she belongs. Days turned to weeks. The CEO paraded new therapists through the house, each one carrying binders and promises. They coaxed, they bribed, they measured progress on charts. But Isabella kept her silence for them, for her father, for her mother. And then one afternoon, as Ruth folded laundry by the window, Isabella spoke again, not to her parents, not to the therapists, to Ruth. Sing. One word. Simple, small, but to Ruth it was a song in itself. She dropped the sheet in her hands, knelt down, tears rising, uninvited. "You want me to sing, baby?" The child nodded, her lips trembling, into something close to a smile. And Ruth sang. Not softly this time, but full, rich, the way she used to sing in church choirs when the Spirit moved. She sang until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, until the silence in Isabella's life cracked wider. When the CEO entered and saw them, his face hardened again. He didn't speak. just stood in the doorway, fists clenched, as if Ruth had stolen something he could never buy back. That night, Ruth was summoned again. This time, the wife spoke, her voice shaking with both fear and resentment. "My husband is considering changes," she said. "We appreciate your years of service, Ruth, but perhaps it's time to explore other arrangements." The words landed like stone, fired, without saying the word, erased so the miracle could be retold as theirs. Ruth wanted to scream. She wanted to remind them that love cannot be outsourced, that children don't choose the richest or the most powerful. They choose the ones who see them. But instead, she nodded. Dignity was the only weapon they could never strip from her. That night, she packed her things. Isabella cried silently, clinging to her skirt. The girl had no words for what she felt, but her small hands spoke enough. Ruth bent low, tears blurring her vision. "You hold on to that voice, baby. Don't let nobody take it from you. When the world gets loud, you remember, you already got a song inside." The goodbye was harder than Ruth imagined, but as she stepped out of that mansion, suitcase in hand, the night air hit her like truth. She was not defeated. She was chosen, and word spread, not through the CEO's press releases, but through whispers, through other housekeepers, drivers, nannies, the unseen hands that kept empires running. The story of the girl who spoke her first word to Ruth became a quiet testimony, shared in kitchens and pews and family tables, not because it was scandalous, but because it was true, and truth, once spoken, cannot be erased. Months later, Ruth found work with another family. Simpler house, smaller rooms, but filled with laughter that wasn't bought. And one Sunday morning, as she sat in church, she felt a tug on her sleeve. It was Isabella, dressed in a small white dress, her parents standing stiff at the back. The child had slipped away, seeking Ruth in the crowd. She looked up, eyes wide, and said again, clear and strong, "Ruth." The congregation turned. The sound echoed, powerful, undeniable. And Ruth knew, in that moment, that no amount of money, no fortress of silence could rewrite the truth of where this child's first words were born. Because children know, and history knows. The story didn't belong to the CEO. It belonged to Ruth, to Isabella, to every black woman who had ever poured love into children while the world tried to make her invisible. And as Ruth lifted her head, tears streaking her face, she thought, "Let them try to erase us. We are written in voices they cannot silence." And so, dear listener, this story is not just about a girl finding her first word. It's about the power of love given in the shadows, about dignity no mansion can contain, about the strength of black women who have always carried miracles in their hands. If this story touched you, if it stirred something deep, subscribe, share it, leave your voice in the comments, because every time we speak, every time we are heard, we break another silence the world thought it could keep.